We will abide by the nonviolence way, but we will commit ourselves to justice agendas within the world. We will be kind of what Howard Watts would call, we will be kind of political naggers. We will be out there complaining and criticizing and showing everything that's going well. We will never do it violently, but we will be highly committed to justice, even if it's costly to us. And basically we do so because this is the way that we experience God's kingdom among us, and this is the way we live. This has been a constant in the Christian tradition. The dominant view in the Christian tradition has been the just war theory, in which self-defense, defense of nature, defense of value is a legitimate way of exercising violence. But the pacifists have grown in influence within all denominations, particularly because they have witnessed a practical commitment to justice that many just war churches do not exemplify as well.
Rabbi Komorowski, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd say there certainly is a movement for pacifism within Judaism, or movements, most prominent of which was founded in part by Rabbi Kronbach, whom I mentioned. It's called the Jewish Peace Fellowship, which is still active today. And perhaps ironically, perhaps not, the nexus of Jewish peace movements in the world is in the state of Israel. That there are many who some would say are willing to negotiate themselves to death. Others would say are overly optimistic, and some would say they're the only and the last best hope for peace in the Middle East. I leave it to all of you to decide. When I have my mind made up, I'll let you know that as well. But I would like one final comment about Jewish pacifism, that I believe firmly that it was a Jewish path of nonviolent resistance that saved Judaism 2,000 years ago. That we tend to think of the great monument of Jewish heroism in Israel as Masada. If you've ever been to Masada, if you go to Israel, no matter what tour you're on, you're going to wind up climbing Masada, or going on the cable car up to this godforsaken hill out in the desert that Herod chose as his vacation home. So it's pretty much, since he was Jewish, it's pretty much the Florida of Israel. And it's 1,000 degrees up there, and there is where the Zealots in the 2nd century chose to die by their own hands rather than submit to Roman rule. Now, had the majority of Jews taken that path, that violent path, Judaism would have ceased to exist in the 2nd century. But instead, there was a small group of people led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, when the walls of Jerusalem were being breached, and Yochanan ben Zakkai asked the guard, who would later become the emperor, he said, "Give me Yavna and its sages," and went to Yavna or Jamnia along the Mediterranean coast, and it was there that he established Rabbinic Judaism, established Judaism that could be practiced in the absence of a sacrificial cult, and it was there that the Sanhedrin and then the Mishnah, which ultimately led to the Gemara and the codification of the Talmud, which led to Judaism today. So if we can we should certainly give credit to Jewish pacifists of thousands of years ago who saved a people. And if that had not happened, there would be no Jews today, and arguably Christianity and Islam would have taken very different directions as well.
Thank you. Wait, can I say something briefly? One interesting thing within the Christian context is how particular individuals have gone about developing their own pacifist thinking. Martin Luther King Jr. began his pacifism on a kind of prudential ground. For him, it was important to be pacifist because the other side had more people and more weapons. If we fight against them, they're going to win us. So that was one argument to be pacifist. It was strictly strategy and kind of tactics. But then he moved into, wait, we have to behave in a pacifist way because it models and helps us create a good foundation to establish a kind of reconciling community after we solve this issue. So there he mixed two things. It was prudential and calculative, but it was also concerned with self-defense. So he will organize this kind of peaceful manifestations, but the first things they would do is they would call the police to be sure that everybody was protected. And he wanted to be protected against people that were throwing stones at him and so on and so forth. So he had a sense that violence was important for self-defense. And then much later on, particularly when he started talking about the Vietnam War publicly and so on and so forth, he took a more in principle stance. That pacifism was not about a tactical issue. Pacifism was not only a strategy. It was not only about self-defense. It was a way of life in which you made a witness of the things you would value. And maybe part of the cost of that witness would be that you would lose your life. But if that was the case, you were not justified in taking somebody else's life. So King kind of embodies the different strands of the pacifist tradition in a gradual period of his own life.
Thank you. Rabbi Komorowski, you mentioned the Masada tradition, and Dr. Razan, you also mentioned that pacifists live longer, but they do unless they're martyrs. So I want to ask you about martyrdom. And could you start off, Rabbi Komorowski? Where does martyrdom fit into the Jewish tradition?
My grandmother thought she was a martyr because we only visited once a week. Martyrdom in Judaism or in Hebrew is called dying al kiddush Hashem, or for the sanctification of the name. And I would define martyrdom as dying for a cause greater than yourself that leads to, doesn't give you any special reward, but that you're sacrificing yourself. And we don't, and there's no great honor in doing it. It's something that is forced upon you, not a decision that you make for yourself. Life is so sacred in Judaism that, and I mentioned the section about why Adam was created in the singular, but as well, we're permitted to violate any one of the 613 commandments, except for 3, in order to save a life. You can eat shrimp out of a pig's rear end on the Day of Atonement to save a life. What you're not allowed to do is murder. It's called shvichut damim, or shedding of blood, which means murder. Avodah zarah, or idol worship, or gilui arayot, which would be incest. Other than those 3 things, you're allowed to do anything. And if you, for those 3 things, if you choose to die rather than do those things, then you would be considered a martyr. Also, people who, we consider that those who have died in the Holocaust, we have our martyrs, those who died. A whole part of our liturgy on the day of on Rosh Hashanah, on the New Year, is about martyrdom, about people who've died at various ugly points during Jewish history. But there's it's not something for which you want to aim. Better to live old, better to grow old and be embittered like my grandmother, than to die young with a middle school named after you.
Dr. Garcia?
Yeah, so we've had a kind of complicated history of martyrdom. I do have to bring the Crusades. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. I got a D in that class.
There you go. Christian martyrs, I think, following part of the Jewish tradition, in many times it was not something that people did in a voluntary manner. I mean, they were even cheering crowds, stimulating certain people to lend themselves to martyrdom, and it was a very ambiguous, very tricky thing. There was still a strong notion that you were not allowed in any way to betray your faithfulness to God, and if that will bring death upon you, so be it. But there were no rewards involved either. There was no promise of a major reward. It was just a commitment and a witnessing to faithfulness in God. That was one way of martyrdom. In the Crusades, it got really ugly, because one way that you would recruit people to participate in the battles